in the sort of neural network range. But in the middle here, we've got a lot of people looking for statistical math and modeling techniques that offer a lot of opportunity, but they also present a lot of risk that we need to be aware of and manage, as effectively as we can. We're seeing this analytics, this middle of this bell curve really push into the SME space. And the types of analysis people are relying on far more than just, the finance and risk management world that used to rely on this type of data modeling. But we're seeing, how a coffee shop cares a lot about subscriptions, and we're looking definitely how market scoring is such an important factor for insurance brokers, and how we work with dental networks, and how lead scoring can be a differentiator to compete online effectively for a dentist. So there's a lot of these sort of mid-market businesses that are relying on data modeling and this type of analysis now more than ever before. And with that, with these firms of varying sizes and varying levels of sophistications, not all of which have armies of data scientists working for them, it really proposes a number of questions as it relates to how much we can rely on these models and how resilient they are to the changes that we're experiencing. So can we trust them after a disruptive event like the pandemic or whatever's coming next? It's not just about what we've experienced this last year and a half, but there's other things that could be more industry specific or within your particular vertical that can have dramatic impact on the way your data informs your decision making. How do we find out if that's actually something that's happened, that's necessary to take stock of? And then what can we do in the future to protect ourselves? So these are the things that we really want to try to discuss today. And Kuhan's going to take you through the way we approach these problems and some of the tricks you can bring back to your business as well. Unlike a lot of people, and sometimes the reaction here is to, like an ostrich, stick your head in the sand and just think that it's a blip, or that the math is strong and it will ride through the change. But people have spent a lot of time and energy to get to a point where they're even using data at all to make decisions. So oftentimes the thought of going back and revisiting that or doing something all over again can be a little too much to bear. And people think, well, it's near enough, is it good enough? So it's not really what we would advise. Our friend here on the right, this ostrich is reading the newspaper trying to inform himself to prove that there is or isn't a problem. So I think if you take that approach and say that we're not foreshadowing that there will be an error, but we are actively looking to prove to ourselves that we don't have a problem. And in doing that, you can bring a very positive perspective to an environment that sometimes can feel a little panicky or reactive. So something to consider as we sort of work through this. So that's really sets up the framework of what we're talking about and why. I'm going to hand it over to Kuhan now, who's going to take you through the substance here. There's quite a bit of content. Again, we're really trying to set this up in a non-technical, usable way. So with that, I'll hand it to you, Kuhan, and you can get us started.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Okay, so given there's a huge variety of models that exist, a wide range of methodologies, all kinds of associated parameters, the question really becomes, how do we efficiently reevaluate our models? And so we'd like to take a big step back, and we're making the assumption we're not in the Watson space of super high-powered AI backend models. Our recommendation here is intentionally non-technical. So we're kind of arguing that in order to have a proper reevaluation of a model in response to a disruptive event, we need a really wide purview. And we got to consider factors that are beyond the data that defines our model. And so we're going to go through three major components. The first one being counts and measurements. The second being descriptions and relationships. And the third being our iterative process. This will help us better understand how effective our models will be post-disruption. So starting with counts, it's a healthy reminder to remember that data is just a collection of observations that are recorded in a countable way. And they're captured in a particular cross-section of time. And we need to really understand the context in which the data is captured including any flaws or blind spots or assumptions that are embedded in that capture, if we actually hope to confidently use our model in the future. The second feature, we typically hunt for relationships that are found in the counts. So relationships, correlations, similarities, and differences. And people discover these. Sometimes it's machines, sometimes it's sophisticated machines, but the end point is to use a variety of techniques to come up with a set of rules. And these rules are sort of the physics of the system that we're trying to describe and explain results. And these rules act as the foundation of our predictions and decision making. Okay, and the third element of models is typically we tweak rules, we tweak and tweak and tweak until we can adequately explain our observations within a given prediction window. And we're not talking about like agent-based complex system modeling. So we're generally trying to describe a fairly static system. And when we're reviewing our model, we aren't concerned so much with the details of the methodology, but it's in fact the way we're trying to pursue describing the system. So are we trying to gain precision on a particular variable? Are we searching for new variables that have greater predictive value? And in that process, we got to ask the question of what this tells us about our basic understanding of the system that we're trying to describe. So those are the three core elements that are behind a model. And once we've arrived at a model that we love, we can set it for a while, enjoy the spoils for potentially many years. We've seen that with some of our clients over the past few years. And that is until a disruptive event happens and changes all of the interactions within the system, and even sometimes redefines the system itself. So each of these core three elements are transformed. Now, next we're going to talk about what specifically to look at within each of those core elements to indicate a broken model. Okay, so counts. Counts are often overlooked as candidates for review or scrutiny. Sometimes something simple like site visits can be a very different number in a new context. So for instance, a device that's typically used by a customer is now shared with many members in a household, especially with homeschooling. So the site count that you have, well, what are you counting and who are you counting? And so while the mechanics of the system of site counting remains the same, the context around the counting has shifted significantly. So we recommend looking at the most important data points in your model, even your core KPIs, and really consider the context change around them. Because our old favorites may not be what they used to be. They might not mean the same thing. Okay, so the fun part when you're reevaluating model is looking for new opportunities and patterns in the data, correlations, new trends, finding new insights. But it's really important to challenge prevailing relationships and hypothesize about the forces guiding new relationships. In the pandemic, we've seen huge changes in spending and website engagements. We're introducing a whole new set of predictive signals. Dan and I always talk about this, where we think a lot of the changes we've seen in some of these KPIs are just because people are bored. People are buying more, they're spending a lot longer reading reviews, and it's quite remarkable to see how quickly behavior can change and reorganize once there's a shock to the system. And finally, a system might take some time to reorganize to a point of equilibrium. And our models might not really indicate obvious turbulence at the beginning, but it's important that you entertain the idea that the system you're describing could be in flux. So it's critical that we look at all of the variables in our models, directly or indirectly tied to significant economic forces. And I think here as analysts, we have to sort of resist the urge to claim predictive power when we're dealing with highly variant systems. We've seen some of the best analysts in the world really be off the mark when it comes to the housing market or cryptocurrency. And the new normal can take a long time to resettle back to something stable. And there are some industries that might feel the effect of these changes much later in time, as from second or third order effects. So we have to have a real sort of understanding of the dynamics of the system that we're trying to describe. Okay, so the three core elements, there can be a lot of change that they're subject to, and it might sound like a bit of a downer that, you know, nothing in your model is usable, the investment is lost, and we have to rebuild from scratch, but that's not necessarily the case. We'll walk through a quick example of how you can salvage some of this work that you've invested in. And these projects can be so huge. They take months to just formulate a data cleansing pipeline, and variable selection can take months. Feature engineering is a long, arduous process. And so knowing where to start can be a little daunting. Like, do you start with the counting context? Do you start with diving into relationships? What we really want to scream out, as sort of a core point, is that model fragility does not live in the details. It does not live in the nuance of parameters. It does not depend necessarily on what statistical methodology you've chosen, or if you know, you might need some more computational horsepower. Will that indicate module fragility? It's bigger than that. So what we really preach is to resist the urge to dive into the details and look to summary statistics. Take a step back, take it back to simple averages, trends, just general summary statistics. Because fragility is about these larger concepts that act as huge forces behind your model. So we recommend gathering a group of really smart people with diverse backgrounds, ones that know your business, know your vertical, know the technology, have some theories about consumer behavior changes, and work as a group analyzing summary statistics to draw and pull out these underlying assumptions, pull them out into plain sight so they can be reviewed as a group and see, you know, should we keep them in the model? Should we take them out of the model? So let's look at a practical case. So this is a project that we've worked on. It was about 2 years ago, where we worked closely with actually a data science team to build and develop personas for a retail company. These personas were built on purchase behavior, purchase frequency, product selection, region was a big factor. And we built 6 personas that were woven into the business as usual. Like, these personas informed a lot, including all the tactics for reaching out to existing customers. And we saw a huge lift in improvement across many KPIs. The pandemic hits and we saw a lot of changes in our accounts. Site behavior, different. Buying patterns shifted. Demographics, surprising behaviors for different demographics. So, you know, an example would be the segments that never used discounts ever before started using them. And people that we could rely on to buy seasonally were buying at really different times. Probably a function of boredom, but nonetheless, it was a marked difference in consumer behavior. And, you know, as marketers, sometimes you can be deluded into thinking some of these changes are causal based on the work that we're doing. So, you know, Facebook ads are killing it. Hey, it must be this incredible creative that we produced. In this case, looking at the shift in counts, it's really critical that we include third-party research to understand if there's huge contextual shifts. So again, we found people are bored. Facebook usage is up across all segments. And we got to ask the question, do we think it'll remain high in 2022, in 2023? Perhaps. Will people who bought a lot of travel products in the past and paused in 2020 pick that up again? Perhaps. So we have to, you know, use third-party data as a reference point to help inform how we can make decisions about how we handle some of these contextual forces. when Dan and I, we work with a lot of clients who optimize media to drive performance, and often we're used to chasing certain signals that indicate revenue, and we've seen changing relationships that are having massive implications on media strategy. All of a sudden, things like add to carts don't mean nearly as much as they used to. Products are correlating differently. We're seeing sort of a convergence between some urban and rural behaviors. And so we need to interrogate to see if our previous assumptions around these relationships hold, see which ones hold, and we question which ones will last. And that again is a non-technical question that has to begin. It has to begin with a non-technical question. Right. And okay, so the system's dynamics. We need to take a good look at that. E-commerce is so dynamic post-pandemic. Some behaviors are elastic. We think they'll fall back into place. Some behaviors might be the new normal. We think that e-commerce might be here to stay for older age groups. We believe that traditional seasonality will come back. People will travel again in time. And so, yeah, these kinds of decisions are how we have to look at these elements and evaluate the system dynamics before we adjust our model. So in this case, for a business that really leaned into activating 6 personas organizationally, challenging this framework, which was very effective, encountered some resistance. So it takes a lot of, because it's work to move to a new model. There's a lot of coordinated effort to come up with creative timing budgets. This isn't all AI-driven produced media. This stuff takes time and investment. So what we did was we introduced a new segment to capture some of the larger behaviors that we believe will persist over the next year. And our plan is to revisit these segments in detail regularly when we predict some stability in the market.
So we're just coming up to 3 or 4 minutes to go here, Kuhan, so we can just get into the model, and,
sure.
And then that'll round us out nicely.
Okay, so how do we make sure we're not thrown into like a reactive scramble the next time any disruptive event happens? You know, like all good consultancy presentations, we have an acronym framework to help us guide us through this problem. But a point we want to make is this isn't just about agility, pure agility or precision. It's about positioning our models to be efficiently resilient. So we have what we call a TEAR framework. The framework we encourage gets embedded into the workflow behind all of our models. So the first, transparency. It's boring sometimes, documentation, but documentation is everything. We want to make sure it's not esoteric and that all non-technical readers are able to understand it without having their Wikipedia open on their iPhone the whole time. It's got to be expandable. So with the disappearance of third-party cookies, first-party data is increasingly critical. Today, I think Jana talked about data deprecation in one of the earlier presentations. So it needs to be really adaptable. We're going to have to collect more first-party data sources to be joined into our database, and it needs to be analyzed against a backdrop of third-party data. So having a pipeline and workflow that's modular that can include this data is key. We want this process to be adjustable. So the levers for tweaking the model are available in one way or another to all stakeholders and not just the data science team. And finally, come back and again and again and again and again, and not just with new data, but with new understanding and new ideas, creative new ideas to help challenge the contexts that are sort of assumed in your model. So to summarize, there is, if you're relying on these models, there is some sense of urgency to take a good look at this. And it's not just about the details. It's about summary statistics. It's about assumptions that are creatively drawn out by a diverse team of stakeholders. And you can't just rely on the data science team to see the whole forest. We have to be proactive with any models in our decision flow, no matter how rudimentary they are. If it's something like even a lifetime value that you have at the back of a napkin to evaluate customers, that should be evaluated again. And embed this framework into your process to really make sure that every model you introduce, no matter what scale, is able to handle a shock.
Perfect. Well, that runs us right up against the clock. Thank you so much, Kuhan. I'm not sure if there are any questions or even if we have time to get to them, but I will say as we round out the session that we certainly recognize this is a very dense subject. There's a lot of content in this presentation. We will happily make a PDF of this available for anybody that is interested. You just need to reach out to us or come and see us in our breakout meeting room where we can discuss this in a little more detail. Because the way to apply this thinking and this approach is going to vary fairly considerably from business to business. So it is always difficult to come up with a one-size-fits-all approach to solving these nature of problems within the varying industries we encounter. So with that, I'll hand it back to Kevin. And again, thank you very much for spending some time with us today.
No, Dan and Kuhan, thank you so much. It is dense. Kuhan, you made that actually comprehensible. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. But I think Dan's comment, final comment about the fact that every business is going to have incredible variations on this. We had a couple of questions. Maybe what I'll do is I'll follow up with Dan and Kuhan afterwards, and you can send some of the answers back out to folks. All right, folks, thanks so much. We appreciate you showing up, and certainly our huge thanks to Dan and Kuhan.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thanks, everybody.
For the rest of the conference.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you.